I don't really want to be the all day is just being the leader. I want to actually be doing. So part of that is by keeping it small, I get to be in this wonderful collaborative space on the same wavelength with my peers in this project, as opposed to I'm just a people herder all day.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Andrew Czarnietski. Andrew is a seasoned generalist game developer with several decades experience in the industry, having shipped 18 titles as programmer and lead designer through the company he co-founded, Serious Labs. He has since stepped away and pursued an indie dev journey with his wife Jen, forming the studio Only by Midnight, and they've just launched their debut title, Curved Space, on Steam. Today, we're going to talk about how he raised more than $300,000 over the last year to develop Curved Space, going from working with a team of 70 plus to just a couple, and the ins and outs of game development from someone who has seen it all. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 7 of season 3 of the Zero to Play podcast. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So this is I think you have a really interesting story. You've had over 20 years experience in the industry, and you've gone from, creating a successful company in Serious Labs to kind of stepping down and pursuing the indie dev journey, which might be flipped for a lot of people and their experience. And I think there's a lot of value and insight that I think you can share with the audience. So the first question that I'd love to just dig right in is, in a talk you mentioned that you got bit by the indie dev bug, and that's why you left Serious Labs to go develop Curved Space. And I'd love to know in a bit more detail what that bug looked like and at what point it started manifesting, if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so I think the big one was Curve Space is a hobby project that all of a sudden grew roots and turned into something real. So I've always had that little tinkering side project, never really looked at that from a commercial sort of lens. I did some CG animation stuff at one point just for fun, and game design idea that I was poking at since actually I think 2012. I ran through a few prototypes, but in 2019, I found myself with a little bit of spare time. They didn't want to buy out some overtime, so it's like, cool. Well, I guess I have Fridays for this foreseeable future, and it's like, well, maybe what about that prototype idea that I'd been poking at? And it started to click. It actually started to click into something real and fun. And what was really interesting to me is my wife Jennifer. Like, I started showing her I've got this cool, like, we're blasting stuff on a 3D surface with 2D game mechanics, and her reaction was, okay, yeah, it's kind of fun, but why? What's going on here? And you know what you need? And she suggested transtemporal space spiders, and it's like, okay, tell me more. And that's really the genesis of this company. Is like, I'm bringing some fun technology, know-how, experience on here's this idea. Jen's bringing her science fiction, fantasy sort of writing background together, and it's like, you know what, this is just too much fun to not do. And so we started to work on it for real, and it started to turn into something for real. And then we started looking and going, okay, well, if we're actually going to try and sell this as a commercial product, like, let's get a real company. Let's start actually thinking about raising real capital to do the marketing. Let's start thinking publishers and pitching and consoles and all of these other fun things that, like, I'd learned from day job land. And somehow that turned into something real enough that I have a box here of discs. I've got a video game on actual discs. So I guess we did something right.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I've played the demo and it's a really, really fun experience. I think the tutorial is done perfectly with how it introduces the player to different mechanics and the kind of story. I haven't played the full game, but the demo I thought was really, really well done. And I kind of want to talk to you a bit about that. later.
Thank you.
But the whole vibe of the game does feel very I don't know if retro is the right word, but like the fonts and the just the UI, it reminds me of a lot of old school games that, you know, I was born in '94, so my gaming journey started with like Nintendo and stuff. But I have played like old school arcade games and things like that, and it did remind me a lot of that. And I can kind of feel that passion coming through the project. But was there like a clear moment where, and this is what I think a lot of indies deal with, is that moment it went from being a hobby to something that you want to take seriously? And maybe it was that moment that you showed it to your partner. But was there anything else that kind of made it seem more real and something that you did want to take seriously? Because that is probably the biggest moment of an indie dev's journey, is that moment there.
Yeah, I love those moments. I think in our case there were many, and just like the one with Jen was a big part of it. But then we also had just to kind of test whether or not this was as fun as I thought it was. We started bringing people over, and so it's a little bit biased because they're friends, but also I know how to run play tests in a. Okay, I'm going to sit back and take notes and watch someone interact with it. And one of our friends is like, "Wow, this is actually really kind of I like this. You found the fun." And that was one of those. It's like, okay,
Mm,
maybe we have something here worth exploring further.
hmm
Another big one was the music.
hmm
And so I had the style of music I was listening to in the background while programming, which is kind of for this project was synthwave, cyberpunky, kind of a dark synth sort of feel. And for those initial playtests, I just had like YouTube video playing in the background to provide music. But at some point, it's like, oh, we should actually look at music for this game. And I traced back some of the songs that would pop up in the YouTube synthwave radio. That's like, this is really good. I wonder who owns this, and I wonder maybe I could license this. And turns out that I was able to. That was a really cool experience too. So shout out to Fixed Neon.
hmm
They have been amazing, and so that was a, you know what, if we can actually license this music, this is awesome. And then that music became a big part of that retro identity.
hmm
Thanks, the music started coloring the game with like the
hmm
glowing Tron lines on things, and we really leaned into that 80s aesthetic. Our main character has Ninja Turtle colors with the green and brown and the visor and whatnot, and it's just, yeah. So many of those little pieces, but each sort of step along that path showed that, you know what, here's something. It's becoming more real. It's becoming more worthy of our attention, and attention is really the cash value at the end of the day. What are we putting our time into?
Yeah.
And so kind of as the further along that went, the more exciting it got, but the more we had to start thinking about it seriously as not just a fun little hobby thing evening and weekends, but as an actual business.
Mm. And are you looking at expanding the team, or are you going to stay kind of indie for now? What's your kind of vision now that you've launched and now that you've seen the kind of sales after the first month? What is your kind of trajectory looking like for the future?
Well, we definitely want to keep doing this. This is just too much fun. So we actually have just completed the prototyping phase for a new project,
Cool.
funded thanks to Canadian Media Fund, which is awesome. Feeling very patriotic about that as a option, although it's not just free money. There's a lot of effort to bring that in, and that did see us increase the team. So if Curve Space was my strengths initially, and then bringing in Jen and her strengths for character and story,
hmm
Tragic Kingdom is we hit COVID. I was actually planning on doing a sabbatical to finish Curve Space, but all of a sudden it's like, you know what?
Mm,
Let's dive into this head first. And so I found myself having quite a bit of time to do this full time. Jen was already didn't have a day job at that, and then there's quite a few very talented people who had lots of time on their hands. This was March 2019, and so it's like, you know what, guys? What if we put this dream team together and pitched a project that plays to all of our strengths, and pitched that? And so that's what we finished prototyping, and it was really, really exciting. So we're currently shopping that around with publishers and looking to see how we can wrangle production funding. It does expand the team a bit, but I think an interesting philosophy on my side is I do want to keep this indie sized.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people go into this kind of going, it's like, I want to found the next BioWare or something like that. And that's cool. And I've actually lived most of that life. I've seen Series Labs go from a spare computer in my parents' basement to 70 people downtown, 3-story office thing, like awesome and cool. And there's a lot of interest there. And I love some of that. I love the people. I love the projects that we put together. But as you start getting more complex projects, more complex teams, and the overhead and the management and all of that, where like Curve Space was just fun to make a thing. There's just that you're making, like, it's pure creativity. And so that was kind of the goal for this company, is we want to be a little bit bigger, want to have a little bit more capability. But I think the dream is, say, like Hollow Knight or Celeste or something like that. We're not interested in doing the AAA-ism. We want to have a small team on the same wavelength, really achieve something special.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because you mentioned that the project was pure creativity, but I think on the other side of the coin, you managed to raise $300,000 to develop this, and I think that there's so much value that you probably learned over the course of your career that led to you being able to kind of pitch this project. How did you manage to secure $300,000 to back a project that was all about, that fun and passion? Like, what advice can you give to other people that are trying to do the same with their passion project?
Uh, Totally fair. And so that actually is split between Tragic Kingdom and Curve Space. So Curve Space, we raised a little over. Actually, there are two programs that we pursued, and we got about 100,000 funding total, and then the rest is on Tragic Kingdom. And
Mhm.
I think it speaks to, like, Curve Space was a hobby initially, right? And hobby, it's fun. There's no stakes. You can kind of explore and do anything. But as it started to become more real, as we started to treat it as a business, now it's like, okay, well, what's necessary for this to succeed as a business? And there's a level of organization and due diligence needed. There's, say, marketing. There's the distribution side. What does that start to look like? What are our internal capabilities? What are we missing, and how much do those cost?
Mhm.
And I'm thankful to have had some really good mentors on the business side all the way through Serious Labs. So I was the technical founder. I was the kind of cliche technical guy in the basement of tinkering on the computer.
Mhm.
But I've had the opportunity.
The Steve Wozniak of Serious
Yeah,
Labs.
in a smaller way, but yeah. And so, like, I've had the opportunity to work with some awesome business mentors, Kelly Morstad, Jim Colvin, Ken McLean, and that's where I've really learned okay, let's have fun making this crane simulator, this VR crane simulator. But it's not just about fun. What
Mhm.
are we making? We're making something for particular industry need. There's requirements, there's budgets. How do you actually navigate all of that? And so there's a lot of that business side that I think is important to consider. And then the pitching, like the big one for me is that was the same as trying to close a deal on the industrial training side. Like I have a whole talk that I've given on the raising funds, but like the big lesson I've learned, and I had some great mentors on the fundraising side. Deanna Douglas, oh, spectacular. Um, uh, but her big feedback is anyone who's funding a project is not funding it out of the goodness of their heart or for altruistic reasons. They have their objective. Canadian
Mhm.
Media Fund has certain objectives. Edmonton Screen Industry Office has certain objectives. Private equity firm X has certain objectives, although those are likely to make money.
Mhm.
And so it's how can you align to those objectives and approach them with, here is this project that gives you what you're looking for and gives me what I'm looking for. And as long as those objectives aren't in conflict, that's where you can find a deal, and then you can articulate something around that deal. And this
Mhm.
is all that business thinking. So even though it's fun and pure creativity, we you can't just step back and just like or focus in on, oh, I'm just going to make the funnest thing. You got to think about the business as well.
Mhm. Yeah. For anyone interested that wants to kind of hear more on Andrew talking about this, you can find on YouTube. He does a great talk about approaching funders, and I think you touched on you made some great points there. And if anyone's interested, they can go and find that to kind of hear the full story and all the value that you can share on that topic. Talking about Serious Labs, and when you're talking about building like the crane simulator, and you mentioned it wasn't just about finding the fun. And I think there's a really interesting conversation I'd love to, or question I'd love to ask about that. And I think there's a real shift happening in the industry right now, where there's a lot more kind of games for education being created, and like exactly what Serious Labs I think was solving in the market, and that was creating these tutorial experiences to teach actual real life skills in like a games environment. What are your thoughts as a whole on that kind of shift that we're seeing in the games industry right now? Do you think that that's going to continue? Do you think that there's that there's a lot of problems in the world that can be solved through VR like experiences?
Oh, absolutely. And check out Serious Labs, seriouslabs.com. They're doing some really cool stuff. And just so proud of that team there. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Game technology is really powerful, and there's been like this multi-billion-dollar arms race in computing to just yield video cards capable of these awesome realistic experiences. But why not apply those realistic experiences to driving a crane or a aerial work platform or a piece of underground mining equipment? And because of the game technology, like we're able to do some pretty advanced experiences relatively cheaply. So that was kind of one of the big things with Serious Labs. But the other one that I found really fascinating personally is the game design aspect. And so, for example, the project that I was leading here before Curve Space, so VR Crane. Oh, it's cool. We cover everything from like a 300-ton overhead gantry crane in a steel foundry where you haul around a giant bucket of 100 tons worth of like lava, this molten steel, and that's cool. Then on the other side, like a tower crane in VR, when you're 50 meters up in the air and you're looking down and has that sway and bounce, that's spectacular as well. But on the one that stands out to me is on the 100-ton construction crane. I have one of the scenario types. You have this sci-fi electromagnet. In fact, we call it out. It looks kind of cheesy, and it's like we even call out. It's okay. You got some sort of sci-fi electromagnet there. But what you do is it's just here's a platform. Use this magnet, which you can toggle on and toggle off, to build a stack of blocks. And it's a toddler's game. It's the sort of game that my 3-year-old would have played, or 2-year-old, with little blocks, except you're handling these like 1-ton blocks out of metal with this giant crane. And the higher you go, the more unstable it is. And if you think about like, what do you want a crane operator in training to learn? You want them to understand how to manipulate objects in 3D space from this sort of perspective, objects that are dangling. And so you need to manage the momentum. You need to kind of counter swing and kill the momentum there so it's not swinging and sloshing around. And there's all these sort of subtle behaviors that basically boil down to moving object from point A to point B. And so if you can build a stack of blocks that have been scattered around the world and then you have to assemble them together, all you're doing is moving from point A to point B in increasingly progressive difficulty, and it's fun. That's the
Mm-hmm.
thing. It's fun. It's engaging. It feels like a game, and
Mm.
you're reinforcing that core learning objective.
So with Serious Labs, do you guys provide hardware that makes them pass the test so that they can be trusted using the equipment, or is it using common VR equipment? Because I feel like that's the difference in a game compared to something that actually teaches you real life skills.
On the control surfaces. So we have a whole series of really neat controllers, like modular controllers for crane, or
Mm,
our stand-up MEWP, MEWP, uh, mobile elevated work platform sim. I'd actually just Google that, just
mm,
search for, or just check out Series Labs and you can see what we have. But so for the MEWP sim, it's a sort of square platform, sort of like a little podium, has a kind of a cage. It's like a shorter version of like a cherry picker, boom lift, man lift.
hmm
It has the controls that map to a real world sim or real world controller. Um, and then it's sitting on a motion base. And then you have a VR headset, and that motion base allows us to give that sense of this platform's moving.
hmm
And the controls being in the right spot, the muscle memory, the idea of feathering controls, those are really important to the experience. The
hmm
actual headset side is off-the-shelf headsets, and it's just great to see that technology become more accessible and more available. Because I love it.
Mm.
But it's yeah, they weren't doing custom headsets, but custom controls.
Hmm. So I'm just trying to think further into the future. I feel like the most widely adopted kind of use case for this would be, say, people trying to get their driver's license. Is that something that you see the kind of future being, as this kind of virtual car inside, the places where you do your driving test, and then you just sit in there and to get the test done?
Absolutely. I'm not 100% sure on the like consumer idea of the like my own driving license, where it's like the cars are easy and the cost of doing so is easy. But if you want to look at like the PAL Plus certification in the UK for mobile elevated work platforms.
Hmm.
This is a major setup that has to be done at very specific sites. You have to fly people out to get there. It's not a trivial thing for them to be able to do that test. Or
Hmm.
the same we've heard from like some of our customers there, like Bechtel. You have this big construction project and you want to bring people to this construction project, and he might be on some country over here and he has a card that says he's a crane operator, but you're in the middle of nowhere. Do you go rent a crane for several $100s an hour? Do you fly him to some city? Do you all of this infrastructure in order to ship him out and realize that, oh, he's not actually qualified? Or
Mm.
can you validate that? And one of the big things right before I left to the indie space was getting into the certification. And so you could actually get that PAL Plus certification through
Mm.
the simulator
Wow.
instead of just and like that's now entering the realm of like the flight sim sort of stuff where it's
Hmm.
legally equivalent to driving the machine.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. Yeah, cool. Thank you for shedding some light on that. Just kind of going more broad. What like, and I love asking this question to the guests that I have on. Like, why did you choose games to get into initially? Like, why did games as a medium interest you? Over 20 years ago, that led to this journey that you're on now.
I always liked making things. And it's funny, my grade 4 teacher once told my mom that she predicted I'd be illustrating biology textbooks because it's a mix of art and science. And you can actually see how consistent that is. And I think actually it was grade 4 under the same teacher. We had a independent study project, and I created my own map for Zelda: Link to the Past. It's like this is what it would be. It was all paper. There is no mod tools, any of these sort of things. But like I love games, and I want to make one, and I want to modify one. And so yeah, 10-year-old Andrew's plan in life was I want to make a game for Nintendo, and that was pretty cool to check off the bucket list here. I've got the box copy of Curve Space for Nintendo Switch, like in my hand. This is a
Oh, that's
surreal
awesome.
feeling. So I think that's there's a little bit of that sort of childhood dream in there. But to
Hmm.
me, it's I just love the whole piece of design. We're creating an experience, and whether that experience is for pure fun and we're blasting space spiders, whether that experience is for building muscle memory and learning how to control the whip in a large crane, whether that experience is understanding the right protocols on a job site. I feel that all of those are valid, and the same sort of muscles apply. I've seen a lot of people go, it's like, oh, why would I try and do game design for business? Ugh. Likewise, there's other people out there. It's like, why would you try and do something for entertainment when there's like real black and white business needs? This one will make money. And to me, it's just we're making an experience, and a lot of those lessons apply all
Hmm.
around.
Yeah, so over the kind of course of your career, and I'm sure you brought a lot of these kind of values to curved space, but what are some pillars of game design that it could be your unique flair, or things that you believe in that you take with you on every project that you work on? Like, I'm looking for like pillars of game design.
Oh, good question. There's a lot on the technical side for how, say, Curve Space is architected in a way that's sustainable to actually produce, test, and launch. On the game design side, I think to me it's important that the moment to moment experience, you understand what you're trying to do, and it feels good. Um, and so like for the crane side, the what you have to do tended to be fairly specific, but there's a lot of things to how does that feel good? How does that build that presence? VR feeling good is different than like a Nintendo Switch feeling good.
Mm.
But then like on curve space, it really came down to like a lot of time was spent into the how do you move on this surface? How do the direct control inputs feel? Does it feel right? Does it feel good to move around and shoot things? So I think like that the baseline interaction has to feel good and make sense. And then you have to understand what you're trying to do with it. And then I think the next one on there is I like to try and keep things fresh as much as I can and shift things up. So with curve space, even though it's a fairly arcade concept and just by good discipline on managing scope, it's a relatively small game compared to things out there. Like there's not a million different ideas, a million different mechanics, but just the way we provide different upgrades and weapons, we're trying to shift it up enough that it can be engaging and kind of keep people present sort of in the moment. And same thing on the crane sim, we have the stacking blocks, but we also have other ones where we're following signals, or we even have kind of a basic wrecking ball sort of one, which isn't a real skill, but it's all about inverting the idea of a wrecking ball to control the swing. And it's just it's I guess getting the user, getting the player to like look at this experience from different angles and to build that presence in that experience as much as possible.
Yeah, fascinating. So knowing that I'm not a programmer by trade, I work in production. I do communicate with programmers on a daily basis, but if there are any kind of people that are passionate about programming listening, is there anything you could share about the kind of pillars of architecture that you have put towards curve space that you know that you're really passionate about that you could share?
Oh, I've learned so many really good ones, and I think Steve Ladke from Serious Labs, and often I credit the little Steve on my shoulder when I'm making a certain programming decision, and I'd say he's more angel than demon most of the time. The certain things we've gotten from that architecture that we've proven it serious, and of course I'm going to take to the way I think about programming just in general now, like a top-down sort of structure. It's clear how authority flows. It's really easy in something like Unity to just have 1,000 different scripts that are all, say, updating, and who knows at what order they are updating and when certain things are available. And by having actually, we're going to control that flow, and this manager runs this, runs these, it becomes a lot more structured, a lot more sustainable.
Mhm.
um, Consistency is a big one. Like I use Unity for this, and Unity is great because it's incredibly flexible, and you can do anything 100 different ways. And actually, this is a few years out of date now, but when we were first switching, we switched from Unreal 2 to Unity because of just the broader platform support.
Mhm.
And we needed morph targets. I needed to blend between two different rubber shapes of an annular and a gas well. And it's like, what? Unity doesn't support morph targets. Like, what the hell? This is standard, right? And like Unreal, you just did this. Well, we had a source license for Unreal. We've modified Unreal doing certain things. If we wanted to modify how Unreal does morph targets, oh, it would have been tens of thousands of dollars and some very advanced programming time.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, Unity's like, oh yeah, we don't support morph targets, but here's like 10 solutions on the asset store, 3 open source solutions, and a tutorial to roll your own.
Hmm.
And I rolled my own in an afternoon. That's
Wow.
insane.
Hmm.
That level of flexibility is like completely insane. And you look at that sort of difference, but here's where the difference is. If you can do something 10 different ways easily, 100 different ways, I have seen so many Unity projects where they do the same, like they do that task instead of doing it 10 times one way. It's just each one's a different way, and they're
Mm.
starting to conflict and they step on each other's toes, and it just turns into soup.
Mhm.
And so that flexibility, which is so beautiful for rapid prototyping, I've seen just turn into a nightmare on something like Unity, where like Unreal, you use it Unreal's way, and if you want to modify that, oh, you better invest a lot of money to modify that. But guess
Mm.
what? At the end of the project, you have 10,000 morph target assets, and they're all the same because they work through the same thing. You can tool that, you can automate test that, you can make programming assumptions about that.
Hmm.
And
Did
so our process was always like use Unity's flexibility to sort of pick a path and then have strong discipline and sort of treat it like Unreal and stick to that path and leverage tooling and consistency and those sort of pieces. So I'd say that's probably the big one on my side.
In today's supporter segment, I'd like to bring attention to Logitech, Logitech Gaming, and Blue Microphones. Thanks to them, they sent me a product bundle that has just elevated the content of this podcast and show. As you can see, the video quality is incredible now. They sent me a Logitech Stream Cam. For audio, they sent a Blue Yeti microphone. I already had one, but now I have two, which will enable me to do in-person interviews and other things like that. And also they provided this Logitech Gaming Pro X headset to have as just a great pair of headphones to use for the podcast, but honestly, I'm going to use it for my own personal work and games as well. So really appreciative of them. Go check them out on their website, logitech.com, bluemicrophones.com, and I think Logitech G or Logitech Gaming. You can find them on social media, and I'm just really grateful for them, and please support their products. Yeah, so talking about Unity and Unreal, when you started out, there weren't these open source, or these game engines that were available to use for free and to check out. Did you ever have any interest of making your own game engine? Did you kind of have that conversation, or was it pretty obvious that you were going to use the resources that were available for free?
Oh, I'm all about the use whatever we can commercial off the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hate reinventing the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
I'd much rather spend my time, like limited time and limited attention, making the thing that's different about my thing special, and not just trying to get to the same level. Like I've had several friends who've done the I'm going to make my own game engine approach,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're doing that as a means to learn DirectX, great. And actually, one of them is now a low-level engine programmer for Bethesda, and another is doing driver development for AMD. So it's like if that's
Awesome.
your way of learning these things, great.
Mm-hmm.
But game engines and technology is now so complex that most likely, if your idea is if you want to make a fighting game, making a game engine is not the right way to make a commercial fighting game.
Yeah.
And we at Sirius we tested that a little bit. Like we had Unreal was great for the simulation space, and then Unity for what we were trying to do. We
Mm-hmm.
did have a visualization tool for like architectural visualization, and we built a kind of a custom DirectX based, very lightweight renderer. But in that case, it was all about presenting a very specific type of data that we didn't need physics and collision and networking and AI and all of these other things. So just it made sense to be a little bit more custom. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'd use off the shelf if I can any day.
Okay, interesting. And I'm sure you've collected skills from all different types of disciplines within games over the last over the course of your career. But is there any other discipline that you would love to learn more of, whether it's animation or 3D art? Is there anything that you're kind of that's on your to-do list at the very bottom when you've got time to kind of chip away and start to learn a bit better, to refine your kind of generalist game design skills?
That is a very good question. I've been described as a professional unicorn because I am so interdisciplinary. And I gave a talk once on I can't remember. I think the original title was "Don't Kill Your Unicorns," but I think I switched that to something slightly more easy. But it's so I am fundamentally interdisciplinary. I'm a designer that learned to program and in the process learned to be a better designer and somehow picked up some 3D art and sound design along the way. So that's a interesting mix, especially when you consider that kind of interdisciplinary cloud, which is already like multiple full-time disciplines right there, also has a fairly big business background and really considered sales and negotiation and how do you actually consider this at like a business entrepreneurial side. So this is already too many hats.
You need more
But
hats.
you need more hats. But the flip side is that particular kind of stack is made for really nice experience pulling together something like curve space.
Mhm.
And so like I stand by it, just it's a lot more work. So anytime I see someone who's like, I try and do interdisciplinary, I try and like, I'm a programmer who wants to learn some 3D art. Great, do it. This is good. And what I highly recommend to any studios out there, support that. Don't just go, oh, well, our programmer job matrix means that he will do these skills and all programmers are the same. That's
Mm,
exactly the wrong attitude. Having people who have some understanding even of these other disciplines is great. And but what I'd say to the other budding unicorns out there is it takes a
mm,
lot of time, and it would have been a lot faster to just be a programmer versus a programming designer who also does some 3D art.
mhm,
And one thing I've kind of learned is there's places where it's nice to work with someone who can do it better. And so like I did a lot of the 3D art for Curve Space. I made all of the spiders. I understand how these things work, but being able to pull in for Curve Space, my friend Jerry Ricard, and it's like the original key art for Curve Space, the capsule art, cover art, all these things. I thought it was pretty good
mhm,
compared to what we have now, it was garbage. And that's because and it was funny, it was just a weekend with Jerry working with me over screen share, going, no, 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 you want to show a little bit more of this, adjust this camera a little bit more like this, show something. It's like, and now we have this cool pose of the ship sliding up the surface with this big spider thing that's Fred, by the way, but stab the ship and it all looks really cool. And you get a sense on what the game is, and it's dramatic and it's eye catching and the colors pop and it's all these things. And that is so much beyond my capability there. And so one thing that I've seen is like on the interdisciplinary side, it's like, well, I know my way around 3D Max. Well,
mhm,
clearly I am now going to do all the animation and all the modeling and all the sculpting, and I'm going to do all the rigging, and I'm going to do all the texture work, and I'm going to do all of these things. And it's a that can be fine for a very, very small scope project.
mhm,
But what you tend to see is it's kind of like, okay, well, now you have this project where, yeah, it technically has modeling, it technically has this, and technically is that, but it's not very good. And
mhm,
unfortunately, that's what the consumer sees. And so it's a leveraging that understanding to be able to go, okay, I can bring in someone, I know what to ask them for. So it's not
mm,
just like me as a programmer who's just like some artist will give me art and I don't know what that means. It's like, okay, I need something to this exact spec, and we're going to use weighted normals because my shader wants to do this and this and this, and I'd like you to rig it with like 4 bone rigs or weights and
mm.
blah blah blah. And Jerry's kind of like, I got it. Now
Yeah,
we have something solid, and I have enough understanding to evaluate what's good work, to modify it if I have to in a pinch, to build on it, all these things. But it was freeing to actually like take off some of those hats and not have to be the one who's doing all of this.
totally. Yeah, no, I definitely see the value in you understanding different tools and programs because it helps with the communication of the vision and, like you're saying, knowing how many bones to have, so that the asset performs well and whatever it might be. So that you kind of answered that, but just coming from a different angle, what advice do you have for delegating? Taking off those hats and handing it to someone else. What advice do you have for other people that maybe might be wearing too many hats and need to like learn to delegate and hand it off to other people more? What's your experience been like with that?
Yeah, very good question. It's an interesting balance, and I think what really matters is understanding what you're trying to build and what you're trying to achieve for yourself. And so I have one friend who was working as a solo dev on a project that you look at it and it's like, this is a $10 million project for a team of reasonable salary. This is insane.
Mm-hmm.
There's some major problems on that. You need to either expand the team or radically change the scope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the answers to that, and I've seen similar all around. And so you get answers on, well, this is very particular to me. I don't want to bring in other people. Well, then that scope had better be small enough to achieve.
Mm,
And it doesn't necessarily have to be out of sort of a arrogance either. I've seen it's like, this is what I like to do. I don't want to bring in other people.
mm,
Totally valid, right? Or this is what I where my sweet spot is. This is what I want to do. Well, if it's the scope is too big, then you need to find places to delegate and cut that. Likewise, I've also seen places where people are like, well, cool, I want to be that manager. I want to have a team of 100 people working under me doing my bidding on all these things. And it's a management is tough. And if you
Mm-hmm.
get into that peer leadership side and the team gets big enough, you're not doing the work. And that's part of my reason on a, you know what, I would rather be on a team of 4 to 6 people making something like Curve Space or Tragic Kingdom
Mm-hmm.
than a leader of 100 people, because that leadership is fun and rewarding and has all sorts of real value, but you're also not necessarily doing, and I like doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think understanding what you're trying to get out of it and then looking at the problem. It's like, okay, if I like doing and my favorite part of the doing is the game design and programming, well, I'm probably not going to do a very good job at the art. I could, but that's not what I really love. So you know what? Let's bring in someone. Let's find someone whom I can trust, who can do a better job than I can. And all of a sudden, you now have these awesome relationships, say with Jerry, where it's like this art just got better.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, especially if you look at it from that sort of lens and have that communication to be able to define what you need and where you go, then it becomes this joy of, it's like, wow, I was thinking this and you made me that. That's so much better. I find that personally really rewarding. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the answer is, what are you trying to achieve? What does success look like to you personally as well as to the project?
Yeah, awesome. It's funny when you mention you don't want to grow bigger than 4 to 6 people. I'm an aspiring producer, and all I hear when you say that is you don't want any production management. You don't want any producers on the team. Is that how you kind of feel? Like once producers get involved, communication becomes too segmented, and that kind of leadership position starts to take hold. Is that how you kind of view production and teams bigger than 4 to 6 people?
See, that's an interesting thought, and I've worked with some really good producers, including the fellow who is, I think he's now the studio head for Serious Labs. Um, I worked with him on a 4 to 6 person sized project, and he was vastly overqualified for this. Although it's a like he ran a major team for EA, and so to then run this small size team, and it was really interesting to see what does good look like. And then I had another chance to work under, I think he now runs programming for PCL, which is a multi-billion-dollar construction company, and they have like 800 programmers. And so I learned his very agile philosophy. It's all about the prioritized backlog, be far done. But it's interesting. So I've seen what good production looks like. To me, the key one is um, it's the interfaces between teams and departments where I find that there's a lot of problems. And there's a great interview with Elon Musk. It was by Everyday Astronaut, ostensibly about aerospike engines. But in that first interview, there was like 3 minutes of pure business gold. And the way he described it is that everyone on Starship, this behind him is this giant, monstrous stainless steel rocket, is ostensibly a little bit the lead engineer. They need to know how all the systems fit together and what we're trying to achieve. Because if you don't, you end up having, you're just engineering not to this overall objective, but you're engineering to your requirements. And the requirements are not going to be 100% perfect. So even if you do a perfect job, you're now limited. And this is how you start to get issues of uh, engineers spending pure brilliance, time and attention and talent making things that didn't need to exist in the first place. Or you end up having these weird seams that become points of weakness. And he said something, I think the flaws in the organization are reflected in the flaws of the product. And I just see within a team, within that Scrum team sort of scale, everyone can be on the same wavelength and know how things fit together. But now you start to have, well, you have the programming team and the art team and the QA team over here and this other team over here. Well, each of those interfaces becomes a point of weakness. And it can be handled well. There are some amazing AAA games out there that prove that those work well. I would also argue that a lot of AAA games demonstrate these major flaws along those same boundaries. You can tell where there's a boundary between the art guys and the programming guys. And it's to me, the big one is mitigating that really comes down to really good leadership and production on that side. And I don't really want to be the all day is just being the leader. I want to actually be doing. So
Mm-hmm.
part of that is a by keeping it small, I get to be in this wonderful collaborative space on the same wavelength with my peers in this project, as opposed to be I'm just a people herder all day. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's kind of more the piece, and it's there's different sort of places. So it's not so much about avoiding project management, because we definitely have some, I'd say, fairly good project management practices based on things that I've learned. But it's more any larger than that, it has to be multiple scrum teams, multiple groups, and then that overhead starts kind of going up exponentially. And like I would just rather make something like Hollow Knight, where it's clear you have the small group that are all on the same wavelength and everything is contributing to this one whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like you've taken, you've learned the kind of production skills that you've needed through your career and your mentors to kind of get you through the project. And I'm assuming you're kind of the one managing the tasks and creating the tasks for your small team. Is there like one process or one practice that you really like that you would recommend to other indie devs that maybe don't have such a production mind, that they could adopt on their small team or their projects, just to help them get through the sprints?
Prioritize backlog and sprint. Like the idea of having this regular point where you can sit back and evaluate what you have and consider what you're trying to do. I've seen so many projects that like try and do waterfall. Some of that was on a business side because they want everything estimated out, but that just doesn't make sense for creative projects. So you need to be agile. And I think there's some real strength in agile with the capital A. But I've also seen cases where, like, I worked with a lead programmer who created a system of tasks in Jira where it took 1.5 full-time people to maintain that system. So
Mm-hmm.
not only did it prevent that person from doing any programming, but their assistant or this other junior on the team, it took half of their time as well. And it was just absolutely brutal. Yeah, it's a cool
Yeah.
system. It does all sorts of reports and things. And it was just so much overhead. And what value did it really offer in the end of the day? And this is where I got a lot of my style from Neil Vaney, who now runs with PCL, and he's very much about proper agile, but his is all the prioritized backlog. You
Mm-hmm.
have an idea, it goes in the backlog, and it's all, and then you groom that backlog. And sure enough, it the stuff that you need to work on next has a habit of bubbling up to the top. Then you have the stuff in the middle that may or may not become actionable, and it's often surprising what does. And then there's the stuff at the bottom, and if it sinks to the bottom, you'll probably never do it. But it's amazing how nice it is to kind of go, yeah, there's that thought. It's in there. I don't have to spend any more time on it. And maybe if I do get that thought that changes it or becomes a priority, it'll start to bubble up. And so that prioritized backlog, reevaluating that prioritized backlog, and then considering the what it is that we're trying to build and how this effort will work towards the objectives of what we're trying to build. And I think that's sort of the key one. And then within that prioritized backlog, it's task definition. And like I can understand where if you have a large team and having standards for defining tasks and acceptance criteria and user stories, these are all very powerful tools. But it was funny because as a small team with Neil, and we had this one thing, and it was just like a single sentence for the task. It was I don't know, like do something this video player or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like don't you want me to write the acceptance criteria or like the user stories of these things? It's like, well, who's going to implement this task? I am. Do you know what needs to be done? Yes. To the QA guy there. Do you know what this task is about? Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Why spend time doing documentation that's not necessary? And that
totally.
really changed my thinking. So
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Yeah, that's it's awesome to see someone with so much experience that goes indie, because a lot of the people I speak to, and I think the majority of the indie community are people that are just starting out, that are just figuring out this. They're still kind of learning about themselves and like what skills they're best at, and it's really refreshing to hear someone that is seasoned and knows kind of what they're doing and how to do it. Um, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that knowledge just from that perspective.
Thank you.
I have a question. If you were to do this all again, 20 years ago, maybe before you decided not to create Serious Labs, like what would you do differently in your journey? Is there any kind of big direction that you wish you invested in 10 years ago that would lead you to a different place now?
Which is funny because that's very much a theme of our new game project, is that idea of reevaluating choices made and who would you be at the end of it. So that
Hmm.
question is very near and dear to my heart. Um, I think I love the journey that I've been on, and I wouldn't change that despite the ups and downs that happen. However, the part that I regret is I didn't seek out the right sort of mentorship early enough. And I tried to do like the wannabe Steve Wozniak, right? But it's like I was the technical guy, but I was not qualified to be the technical guy at that time. And I learned an awful lot. And like self-taught skill is good. Like I'd like to think I'm now a very good programmer. You look at the type of math that we achieved for Curve Space running on Nintendo Switch. Like there's some pretty awesome stuff there from just a pure technical perspective. But Andrew back in the day was just YOLOing it and not knowing any better. And I learned a lot and I got pretty good at certain things. But there's also some really bad habits in there and stuff that I didn't know. And then it was by working with guys like Steve, where it's like, oh, that makes so much more sense. And that's a much better way to approach it. And this makes so much more sense. And so by working with these mentors and in this sort of environment, like I leveled up more in 6 months working with Steve than I did in 3 years prior, just kind of like trying to forge my own path.
Mm-hmm.
And so the big advice I'd say to a lot of guys starting out is like, I only felt qualified to do the I'm going to jump out there entrepreneurial style and do this indie thing after like having done this for more than 15 years. That's the point where I felt like, you know what? I think I might finally be able to pull this off. Where I see so many kids come out of university or college and it's kind of like, cool. And I think I'm going to have a 20-person team and we're just going to go rebuild like Final Fantasy. And it's like, you're not. You might learn lots of things on the way, and that's not a bad thing, but that's not a success. That's not a financial success. Now, I have seen kids come out of university and go, I'm being very precise about this sort of scope and I'm going to work with these people and it's brilliant and they pull it off and it's amazing. But usually you get this kind of like, yeah, I just finished 2 years worth of like basic programming classes and now I'm just going to go like architect my own game engine and then we're going to sell that for $1 million. It's like, no, you're not. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so the working under mentors and learning, because otherwise you end up with sort of the blind leading the blind sort of situation. And so
Mm.
like I learned a lot self-taught wise, and those are some really good lessons, but it would have been better for me had I been working in an environment with mentors earlier.
Mm. Yeah, no, I've honestly really loved this whole conversation. I think you've just mentioned a lot of value. I love your attitude and just the how you can speak on the indie dev journey from such an experienced perspective, which I think is incredibly valuable to a lot of the community and the people listening. Um, well, we're kind of out of time now, but there's one more question I want to end on. But first, I just want to quickly check before I forget: is Curved Space going to be put onto the Steam Deck? Is that something? Because I feel like that game would almost be designed for a device like the Steam Deck.
I would really like to. We have it. It runs great on Nintendo Switch. It's also runs great on PlayStation, Xbox, including PS5 and Series X. It runs really nice on those. So uh, I think in principle it should run fine on Steam Deck. The Linux ism has gives me a little bit of pause.
Mm,
One of the regrets on Curve Space is I really wanted to just support Linux, but the GPU readback stuff that's kind of fundamental to the engine isn't really very clean for OpenGL. It isn't directly supported, so I'd have to rethink some of the core architecture, but I
mhm,
would love to do Steam Deck. And the handheld, I can definitely say playing this on Switch
mhm.
feels great. So I think like design wise, yes. If there is an issue, it would be around Linux, and I'd like to tackle that. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. So yeah, thank you so much for the conversation today. The last question I have, which is probably a question that could become its own talk one day, but what it like, and it's based off what you'd just spoken about. What's the piece of advice that you have for people finding mentors? That seems to be an echoed comment throughout this conversation, and I'd just love something actionable that people could maybe do to try and find those mentors that have helped you in your game dev journey.
A big part is working on a project together. So the getting a job where you're a junior and there's someone qualified as a senior, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that speaks to try and find a place as opposed to try and do it all yourself initially. But I think the other one is a just reach out
Mm-hmm.
and like I've done it only a handful of times. I'm not actively seeking out mentees. I'm not knocking on doors at the university or that, but every now and then I get some student who's like, "Tell me about some of this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go for coffee." And it's like, you bet I'll go for coffee. Heck, most of the time I think I've even paid for the coffee, and I'm happy to share and offer what advice and pieces I can. And I know a lot of my peers are the same,
Mm-hmm.
and we're happy to give back and pay it forward. So I think the the people who kind of recognize that, and it is a bit awkward to go and ask, but it's like take see some of these people, reach out to them on Twitter, Discord, in person if you can, and there's a wealth of knowledge that is freely available or very cheaply available, and all you have to do is ask. Now, the one caveat I would say to that is I'm more than happy to share insights, and heck, I'll take a look at your pitch deck and give you feedback and that sort of stuff. But there's a little bit of an arm's length one. I don't expect that someone out there is going to be your software architect or be
Mm-hmm.
your CEO for free.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like trying to help find yourself, and there's lots of there's so many people out there who would love to share and who've been down some of these paths before. You don't have to do it all yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really really well said. Thank you for sharing that. If anyone is interested, they can follow Andrew and Jen's journey at Only by Midnight on Twitter. Follow them there. Definitely go check out the Curved Space demo on Steam like today, and just experience the game. It's free, and it's an awesome fun experience. You can also go to curvedspacegame.com. Is there anywhere else that you would like people to visit to find you? Maybe on LinkedIn, perhaps?
Yeah, LinkedIn, you can see me there, Andrew Czarnietski, CZARNIETZKI. But Twitter, we're most active on Twitter, and then CurveSpace. It's out, it's real, it's available on all these platforms. So
Yes.
give it a shot, and feel free to reach out to me. Twitter, Discord, I'll tend to be most responsive with, and I'm always happy to talk game dev and business and this. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for your time and sharing your stories and your value today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you for putting together this podcast, just talking to experts in the field. I've actually found some really great conversations here. So appreciate what you're doing. And thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I hope you learned something about game development, the games industry as a whole, or the future of games. You can follow us on Twitter at Zero to Play, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, or any other podcasting service. Other than that, you can find links to this episode down in the description below, and I'll see you guys next week for the next episode.